So the rest of our parts are in for our dump trailer rebuild project. Let's go pick them up. It's like Christmas morning. So we got our new instruments for our trailer rim quartet. Now we're going to mount them up. Put on our nice chrome valve stems. These are the high pressure ones. Little bling for our trailer. One down. I think I found a faster way to do this. Definitely faster. So now we got our tires ready and all our parts are at home. It's time to start on the trailer. Get it back up in the air. Pull the tires off, hopefully for the last time. Now we're going to take some measurements on our good side so that we have them for our other side. We're measuring the front just to make sure that everything we're measuring off of is okay on the other side. Never hurts to have too many measurements. Because I'm old, we're going to write them down. I forget things. We're going to measure the rear spring. Measure the inside and the outside just to make sure it's not twisted. Write them down. Now we're going to measure the overall length. From the front of the front spring to the rear of the rear spring. Inside and outside. Write them down. And then we're going to set up our welder. So I'm welding the bracket. Normally it's just welded on the top, but I wanted to make it better than the factory did. We have everything cleaned up and ready to weld. If you look, there's little rust holes here. Those are from the holes in the center of the bracket. They should be able to line those up. And if they match up, we'll check all our measurements. If they're good, we'll weld it in place. So we're just going to use the porta power to hold it in place, line it up as best we can with our little rust spots, fine tuning. Now we can measure it and see how close we got. That side was on. That side was not. I'm going to fine tune it a little bit. Because even though the outside was on, the bracket was twisted a little bit, so the inside was off. So now since we moved it, we got to measure the outside again. Make sure we didn't move that measurement. Now we'll check and make sure our springs that we're measuring from are in the same place. Probably should have done this part first. Everything looks good. We're going to tack it in. Measure it one more time to make sure nothing moved. If it has, we can always grind those little welds off and move it. Everything looks good, so now we're going to weld it in permanently. All the YouTube welding pros can tell me how wrong I did this. You know, all those guys that have never touched a welder in their life but know everything. We're going to grind down the welds a little bit. We use a wire brush to clean up some of the loose paint around the edges where flaked off from welding from the heat. Clean it up with a little wax and grease remover. It comes coated with a oily film paint won't stick to. So we're just cleaning that off. I'm going to put some etching primer on there and a spray can because they won't let me use spray guns yet. Maybe someday when I'm a professional, they will. This is just temporary till we can get it painted. Then all we'll have to do is scuff it down. It'll keep it from rusting in the meantime. So now it's time to straighten out our fender a little bit. We got our Denali frame rack in position. We're going to tie it down and start pulling. So to get that twist out of the fender, we have to hold the inside edge back. So we're going to use a ratchet strap in the back to hold the inside back. We'll clamp onto the edge of the fender on the outside. Put our putter power in there so that when we're pulling it, it's not pulling down, it's pulling forward. Now we got to come along so we can pull the fender. Now we're going to hammer it straight, get all the buckles out of it. Well, there goes plan A. So plan B is very similar to plan A. Just have a new strap and provisions to keep it from ripping in half. I hope. So now we're going to hammer the buckles out of it again, or at least try. Yeah, didn't rip. Alright, this is definitely plan C. We got our novelty pipe wrench here. We're going to bend the bracket a little bit to straighten out the fender where it's welded on. Now we're going to straighten out the bracket. At least we're going to try. And we're going to give up and realize that the only way it's going to be straight is if we either heat it or take it off and straighten it. If I'm going to take it off and straighten it, I might as well just replace it. So that's what we're going to do. So now I can grind off the old welds on the frame or where the bracket mounts, grind them all smooth so it's just down to the bare frame. Now the fender bows up at the top. So we're going to ask it nicely to straighten itself out. Close. Still needs a little work. So we'll ask again. It's getting there. One more time. Perfect. Now the top is flat. So now it's time to throw the axle underneath it. Roll it in here now, because once we have the springs in, it'll be a lot harder to get in there, since I put the jack stands in such a convenient location. So we can pull the spring out of our right side. I got an extra one. A couple of you guys mentioned it looked like it was cracked. That was just the paint flaking off. It wasn't actually cracked, but I did get a new one anyway. I got a spare if I ever do break one. So now we got a new spring. Slide it in the front, line up the eyelets in the spring, and slide the bolt through. Hammer it in so that the splines are into the bracket. We can tighten it up. Don't need a wrench. I'm going to do the same thing on the driver's side. Lift the spring up a little bit and slide our axle over it. Put it on a little pin. And cross our fingers that it stays there while we jack it up. This is a lot easier with 2 people, but the afternoon crew is in Disney World. I'm going to do the same thing on the passenger side. Jack it up a little bit. The more level it is, the better chance you have of it staying on the alignment dowel. So it's in there where it belongs. You can jack it all the way up. I can put our rear bolt in. Don't have to line up any eyelets on this one. That spring actually just slides on the bracket up on top. That's why it's called the slipper spring. So you just have to raise the spring high enough to get the bolt in, and you're good. Yeah, not high enough, buddy. So the nuts go on one way. There's little indents on the outside, and that's because they're lock nuts. So you want the indents facing out, and when you tighten them down, they're not loosening up. And we go tighten up the passenger side. You can see the bracket up on the top there that the spring slides on. Now we can put our U-bolts in. Just drop them down in there. Put our plate on the bottom. There's a pin in the bottom that goes in that center hole. So you line that up and tighten them all down. Put the lock nuts and washers on. When you tighten them up, you want to kind of tighten them evenly. Just keep doing a crisscross pattern. I'm going to use the Untitled torque specs. Put our U-bolts on our driver's side. Put our plate on the bottom and run it up there. Pull the axle down into place. I'm going to hook up our trailer brakes. It's just 2 wires. We'll cut off our old ones, strip them, put our new connectors on there, crimp them down. Connect our new wires, crimp them in there. Now we can heat them up with a less than convenient propane torch. I'm going to throw the tires back on. Where's that crossfitter when you need her? That side's done. Now onto this side. Now we can put this extra tire I found up on the trailer. Or at least try. Not happening. We're going to need our patented stud alignment tool from Texas Pride. We'll run the nut on there, clean up the threads, and then make sure that we don't bend the threads when we try to bend the stud down. At least if we do mess up the threads and the nut is on there, when we undo it, it'll straighten them out. I may or may not have bent some threads in my day. We'll put our tool on there, adjust a little bit. Okay, a little bit more. One more time. There you go. Let's try this again. Success. And we'll bolt it in place. Now we're ready to put the trailer back on the ground. Alright, now we need to get rid of these ugly lights. So they weld a piece of 2x3 tubing on there to space these lights out a little further. So we're going to cut this tubing off because our new lights are a little wider and much better looking. We're going to ask that nicely to leave. It's not listening. Grind a little bit more off. Ask it again. Grind a little more off. Alright, I'm done asking. It's time to go. Now with that out of the way, we can get to that bracket on the fender a little easier. So we're going to grind that off. And we'll ask it to leave. That one was slightly more compliant. So now we can grind down the rest of our welds on our fender. Now we need to straighten out our fender. It's got a crack up in the top, so we got to close it up, and we're going to weld it up. Now we can take our friction jack out of the way. Now we'll weld our bracket on. We tacked it onto the frame already. Now we're just going to weld it onto the fender. Now we can pull it back into position. Take this buckle out of here. We bend it back, hammer and dolly it out. That'll keep our fender nice and straight then. Now we're going to put on our novelty C-clamp. Came in a set with the pipe wrench. And weld our bracket on. Should be good. I'll weld up the holes that are in our bracket. Now we can weld our bracket to our frame. Now to replace that tubing that they had on there, we're just going to put a plate over it. Get it as square as we can. And we'll tack it on. Now these are our new taillight pockets. So the driver's side's a little more complicated since we have to put the license plate on there. So first we're going to drill a hole for the license plate light. Make sure that the license plate light fits in there. Grind off the burrs on the edges. Now we can line up our bracket for our license plate. Clamp it up. And it's got the holes in it, so we're just going to weld it through the holes. Now that license plate bracket might look familiar since it's the other half of the battery hold down bracket that I made. Now since license plates can be heavy, apparently, I'm going to weld the back of it. We're just going to weld a bolt in the back for a stud. That'll be our ground for our lights. Passenger side's a little easier. We're just going to weld the stud in there. That should do it. Now we can put our taillight housing in place. Fine tune it a little bit. Check our license plate alignment. Yes, I know it's a car plate. I just grabbed a random license plate laying around. I just needed a measuring tool. Looks pretty solid. But can we be sure? Well, apparently it's rated for 1 Scott. Now we gotta drill a hole in the back of it for our wires. Just the 2 panels that we welded on. Now we're gonna remove the hideous lights from the other side. Might as well save them in case somebody else wants to make their trailer ugly. Grind off our bracket. Could get the die grinder in on the top, so we just use a Sawzall. I threaten this one. So we'll grind all of our remaining welds off and put our plate up there. We can weld the plate on. Now we can put our taillight housing up. Fine tune it. And weld it up. Can't be sure of the weight rating on that one because I did not test it. So now we got it in the paint room. The supplemental afternoon crew is here. So they're going to take it from here. I'm just going to pull the tire off so he can get in there and paint everything. I don't know why he's not wearing the proper afternoon crew shorts and tank top. I'm just using a wire wheel to clean up any of the loose paint where there were scratches and scrapes. Then we'll sand the fender. We're only going to paint the fender and the frame where I welded, and then the new taillights. I gave him the option of painting the fender on the other side if he felt inspired. He did, so I have 2 shiny fenders on my rusty trailer. So now that everything's painted up, we can throw all our lights back in here. So now we're going to connect all the wires and heat shrink them. Bolt our grounds to our studs that we installed earlier. Makes life so much easier. Put in our little gaskets for our lights. Now you can plug in our light. Pop the marker light in. Now we can plug in our taillight. Stuff all this spaghetti in there. Pretend like it doesn't exist. And pop our light in. Much better looking than the originals. Now onto the driver's side. Throw our license plate light in there. Bolt it down. Now we can attach our ground wires to our stud. Tighten it up. Strip our wires. Put our connectors on there. Grab them over. Now we'll heat up our heat shrink tubing with the lighter. Since you guys all seem to think I smoke anyway, we'll run with it. Now we can put the rubber gasket in for our taillight. Plug our taillight in. Stuff our spaghetti in there. And pop our taillight in. Now we can plug our marker light in and pop it in. Check them and make sure they work. Marker lights are good. Stop lights are good. We're done. Want to try the wheel again? No. Where you going? Now we're going to have to hit up the real gym to reverse the side effects of CrossFit. And we'll try this again. Success. We won't tell her I secretly filled the tire with helium.
This way.
This is usually everyone's favorite part of the build, where we play What's in My Console. Well, we don't have a console, so we're going to play What's in My Toolbox. So, let's see what's in the toolbox. Would you look at that? A console! I guess we do have one. We'll play. Wonder what this could be. Bolts in the pile. Bolts were the last one. What's in this one? Rust. We'll put it with the rest of the rust. We got a letter from the EPA. Must be about that little leak I had. Throw that in the pile too. Keys. I wonder what these go to. Subscribe and find out. That looks like it. Thanks for playing What's in the Console that's in the toolbox. So like the video if you found it interesting. Share it if you think somebody else might. Subscribe if you want to see what those keys went to. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next build.